Greetings and welcome to the MU2605 class session for Friday, April 17th. Today's brief musical excursion will involve me sharing a groovy instrument. I picked this up in Porto Alegre, Brazil a few years back. It's called a Brazilian samba whistle, and it's been known to inspire people to dance. My hope is that my musical performance here will inspire you to learn. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Brazilian samba whistle. All right, consider yourselves inspired. Let's get started on our chapter 10, on how do they learn. Some really valuable material here. And so before we dig into the information, I would like to share once again some words of inspiration. And this is apropos because you have your Benefits of Music Education project that's due tonight, which is Thursday the 16th. Here we go. There's some good neuroscience research that children involved in music have larger growth of neural activity than people not in music training. When you're a musician, and you're playing an instrument, you have to be using more of your brain. Okay, there's today's words of inspiration. Okay, a couple of points of emphasis for this particular chapter. One is that we'll dig a little bit into the psychology of learning. And two is that we will share some thoughts about motivation. Key pieces of information. And what I want you to do is just really kind of get a general overview. You don't have to understand how to apply all of these theories, but it would be really valuable for you to take some notes. In fact, I'm going to ask you to write something down here in just a moment. So you can go ahead and grab a piece of paper, pause the video, get yourself a piece of paper and something to write down with, but you would also maybe take some notes on some of the learning theories that we will discuss. All right, so on how do they learn? Well, we have two primary psychological perspectives for learning. One would be the behavioral, and the other would be cognitive. But before we get into those, here's what I want you to do. You've got a piece of paper, and many of you are probably familiar with the KWL chart. If you're not, that's okay. I just want you to write down three things. You're going to have a column that's a K column, and then a W column in the middle, and then an L column. And I'm not sure if I'm mirroring this correctly for you, but K would be on the left, W, and then L on the right. And here's what I want you to do. In your K column, I want you to just write a little bit about what you know about how people learn. Take a few moments, just maybe 2 minutes or so, and write down what you know about how people learn. After you've done that, then I want you to take a couple minutes and write down what do you want to know about how people learn. And then finally, when we're finished with this brief session, then you're going to write down, okay, what did you learn? Okay, so back to the behavioral and cognitive isms. In behavioralism, we tend to observe changes in behavior. So this very much has to do with how living things, and I say living things because, yeah, we're concerned with how humans learn, but behaviorism has been known to be applied with animals as well. In fact, a music education professor with whom you're familiar actually applied behaviorism principles to teach his cat how to fetch. Yes, that was successful for a short period of time. And then on cognitivism, we're looking more at mental processes, brain function, and so it's very much the thought part of concern for learning. And we will have in conjunction some thoughts on motivation, because motivation is really what's truly going to drive our learning and have to do a little bit with how we learn as well. So two primary types. One would be intrinsic, in which the task at hand is so enjoyable that we are intrinsically, we can consider it rewarded, but we're intrinsically motivated to perform the task. The other would be more extrinsic forms of motivation, and that's where these are external kinds of rewards. We can think of these as token forms of thanks or appreciation, things that we may give to students for learning. Now, we're going to want to emphasize intrinsic motivation. This would be one of our goals. Not that we won't employ extrinsic motivators, we certainly will, but we want to gradually get to a point where our teaching and learning circumstances become intrinsically motivating. One of the reasons for that is that the research suggests that people with intrinsic motivation tend to last longer in a given domain. They'll tend to participate in music longer into their lives if they feel that sense of intrinsic motivation. Okay, back to behaviorism. 4 types, so these would be some of the real highlights for behaviorism. 4 types of operant conditioning would have to do with positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and then 2 forms of punishment, both negative and positive punishment, or what we would just call punishment. Positive reinforcement is when we administer a desirable reward, and this gets back to that kind of extrinsic motivation factor. But sometimes it doesn't have to be a token or an object that we give somebody, but it could be reinforcing their behavior through approval. It could be verbal approval, it could be a wink, a nod, a smile, pat on the back, etc. Those would be forms of positive reinforcement. We can also seek to engage behaviors through negative reinforcement, where we remove an unwanted condition. You could think of this in sports exercise training, where members of a team are working on a certain drill and they have to run, and it's like a shuttle drill or something. I'm thinking about on the basketball court where you run and you go back and then you run farther and you go back. Well, if the coach blew the whistle and said, okay, we're going to stop that because they've worked so hard, then they're removing the undesired, which is the difficult exercise, as a reward. Okay, and then we have punishment, which of course where we administer negative consequences for undesired behaviors, and then negative punishment, or what we call extinction, where we remove a desired condition in order to reduce behavior or to extinguish it. And we can think of this as, like for example, withholding attention from a student who might not be, or a student who is exhibiting an undesired behavior. If we withhold attention, we don't give that attention, that would be a form of negative punishment. So reinforcers seek to increase motivation, whereas punishers seek to decrease or extinguish behaviors. Okay, on to cognitivism, which we mentioned has to do with brain function, the way that we process information, and the authors suggest this progression from sensory register onto short-term memory, and once that's successfully processed, the information can be committed to long-term memory. And this would be one of our goals as educators, is finding the right kinds of processes so that students can transfer information into their long-term memory so that they can continue to recall that information and apply it in their music making. Some other thoughts on maintenance rehearsal, which involve repetition. Chunking is something that we do quite frequently in music, where we deliver the information, or we deliver the music into smaller, more manageable chunks so that our students can then make connections and put it together into a more holistic kind of, like for example, a performance. And then on to elaborative rehearsal, which we associate new and existing information. The authors state that music concepts, including the combination of cognitive and expressive attributes, or I'm sorry, that music concepts include those combinations. And learning transfer can be structured, and it should be structured, and it should be sequenced. And this is most beneficial when it is meaningful, when it's thorough. It involves similarity. We can think about, okay, this is similar to something that you have learned before, that it involves principles and not merely facts. And then learning takes place through varied and numerous types of opportunities. Okay, so a few additional terms to share with you. Attribution theory. This is an important consideration for us, and we should ask ourselves these questions that when we have a, let's say, an unsuccessful performance, what kind of factors did we attribute to that to? Hopefully, we would be able to look at things realistically and say, well, maybe there were kind of some internal factors, that things that I could have done differently in order to have a better performance. But often it's very, I would say, natural for people to want to attribute those negative factors to external things. Well, it's like for a sports team again, I'm sorry, I love sports, so I talk about that. It was the referee's fault. They didn't ref the game fairly, or it was bad luck. Bad luck would be an example of that kind of external form of attribution. And mastery orientation and performance orientation, these are other important questions that we can ask ourselves about the nature of motivation. People who employ mastery orientation have the concern for the task itself. We want to increase our skill so that we can give the best musical performance. But often people have more of a performance orientation where we're concerned really with how is the performance perceived by others. And this would be another goal for music educators, would be to try and transition that performance kind of orientation into something that's more mastery orientation. You can see how this could be really closely linked with intrinsic motivation, which again would be a goal for us as educators. And discovery learning is a very specialized kind of learning in which we engage students in varied experiences in which they have freedom, there's flexibility for them to manipulate, for example, musical sounds in different ways, to experiment with different kinds of instruments. And so there's been a lot of benefits associated with discovery learning. And then constructivism is something that's addressed quite in depth at the end of the chapter. Please read about constructivism. It is one of the more cutting edge and contemporary theories in education. And so this is something that you should know a bit about. It has to do with constructing knowledge based upon prior knowledge and or experiences. And constructivism is something that takes place in real, authentic learning contexts and through meaningful experience. It's something that has been applied readily in music education settings. And then a couple final terms. Social constructivism is where we are able to not only construct, but to co-construct knowledge through meaningful experiences with others. So if the administrators are asking you, hey, how you doing in your distance learning? You say, well, you know what, I'm doing pretty well. I'm trying to develop my intrinsic motivation, but to be honest with you, my social constructivism is suffering a little bit. So this is something that I kind of feel we're missing a little bit of this in our distance learning, and it's something that we can look forward to when we all get back together on campus. Finally, the ZPD, or the zone of proximal development, is something that as educators we can really kind of strive to focus upon in terms of getting our students in this particular zone of where learning can be optimized. Okay, and Vygotsky, who was the person associated with this theory, explained that zone as being a place where the student cannot perform independently, but can do so with help or assistance. So in other words, like just beyond your ability level, but it's not so far out of the zone that you could never really achieve it, because we don't want the student to shut down. We want them to still maintain their sense of motivation. So if we give them the kinds of assistance, the kind of scaffolding, the kinds of structure and sequence, then they can ultimately succeed. Okay, here's one of the charts from the textbook, and I encourage you to read up on classical conditioning, that which was associated with Pavlov. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move my piece so I can read all of this. The other one would be operant conditioning with BF Skinner. So read about some of the differences between behaviorism and cognitivism. I'm not going to read through the chart here, but it'll be in the PDF file for you. And of course, you can find it. It's in various iterations. Actually, the authors continue to build upon this information throughout the chapter. Okay, so now back to that original chart that you composed. And just think about this as being, short and quick. I'm not going to ask you to turn it in, but as an exercise, I think it's valuable for us to now consider, okay, what did I learn about how people learn? Take a few minutes and complete the KWL chart on your own time. Okay. Finally, announcements. The video demo is due tonight. So hopefully you're seeing this video before that time, but it's due tonight at 10 p.m. The teacher observation is due 1 week from tonight on the 23rd. All of the details for all of these projects, again, are in Canvas. We have the check-in number 4, which is in a little more than 24. It looks like about 29-hour window of time, or maybe my math is wrong, 31-hour window of time, but it opens on April 23rd, which is a Thursday at 12 p.m., and then it'll close on Friday the 24th at 7 p.m. You must take the check-in during that time. If somehow you're prevented and you notify me well in advance, then I may be able to accommodate a different time frame for you. Otherwise, I'm going to count on all students being able to handle that task within the given time. Final exam will take place on May 8th. 9 a.m. Further details to come in the near future. So, all right, everybody, be safe, be well, keep on reading your chapters. I'm already seeing some of your Benefits of Music Ed videos. They are awesome. They are super awesome. Make sure that you do peer reviews for that. You have until Monday to complete your peer reviews. Let me know if you have any questions. Peace.